Hello, I'm Mubin and I'm sitting here with the leadership of Faces. This is Tony Thompson, Rahana Faisal and Peter Adams. We're an interfaith charity which combats child sexual exploitation. As you may know, it is Interfaith Week and we'll be basing this discussion around what interfaith organisations can offer in a secular society. You also get to learn a little bit more about what we do through this panel discussion. So I'd like to hit the ground running and ask you, what's the most exciting part about working in Faces?
The relationships.
Yeah.
The relationships. The opportunity to work together across faiths that often are regarded as being divided, but actually to talk about really deep, complex issues openly and honestly, and to do so knowing that we're all on the same side.
Yeah, I think as a principle, we learn more from people who are different than you are than people who are the same, and it's not just the friendships, but built on those friendships is a mutual respect and an opportunity to learn from each other. So I've learned so much through the friendships and the relationships within Faces. I know I'm a different person now than I was 5 years ago, and a lot of that is due to those relationships and the discussions that I've had.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, we haven't been a group of people who have come together to perform a particular function. We've worked really hard on building those relationships. We have supported each other, we've been patient with each other, we've humoured each other, and we've listened to each other, which has created a context really where we've been able to have really challenging conversations and learn from it and move on from it and grow as an organisation because of it. And I think as an interfaith organisation, I think that's a really important part of what we do, but I think we're especially good at it here at Faces, and I think we often find that other people are really impressed, sometimes taken aback by the level of openness and frankness of the discussions that we're able to have.
So you mentioned challenges. Can you give me a specific example or a case study in this case about a challenge which you kind of resolved, and how did you resolve it?
Well, I think the obvious one is actually, and really what brought us together was a sense of finger pointing at child abuse, exploitation within each community. So, for example, when the stories around Muslim grooming gangs, quote unquote, were very dominant, Rahana and I, my conversation was, actually, I can't point the finger at you because I look at the Church of England, which I'm a part of. We've got child sexual exploitation cases coming out of our ears. And we need to deal with it, but I can't point the finger. So it's actually that very real honesty, reflection around issues that are common to us.
Okay.
There's a real challenge to be honest and open and vulnerable at that point.
Would you say it's more of an institutional thing then, rather than a faith issue?
It's at every level. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not primarily to do with faith, it's around the institutions, structures that are formed around faith, yes, often.
Okay.
I just build on that to say that abuse, sort of really central to abuse and how it happens are power, imbalances of power, and how that functions, and that's across different forms of abuse, whether that's exploitation, sexual, criminal, whether it's familial abuse, whatever context that is, domestic violence, there is an imbalance of power often, and there is an abuse of power, and that can happen, yes, at an institutional level, but it can happen at individual levels as well. But again, those are the conversations that we've been able to have and the nuances that we've been able to develop. I know that Tony and Peter won't mind me talking about the way that we reflect on how narratives are built differently for different groups of people, and again that's because of power and who has it and who doesn't. So articulations and narratives around abuse within the Christian faith institutions has been very different to how on-street grooming of children has been framed as a Muslim problem. And again, that's because of the strength of our relationships that we've been able to have those conversations and acknowledge the unfairness in those narratives.
That's an interesting point you made there. Oh, yeah, I was wondering what Tony thought about this.
Well, I was just thinking we can apply that to abuse, but I think the challenge is not just in abuse, it's in society as a whole. And so one of the challenges that we've had to face is those power imbalances and the prejudices and the deep-seated institutional racism that lives in society, and to challenge that amongst ourselves and to make sure that there's a shared power between Christians and Muslims within faces, between men and women within faces, and to learn and understand those dynamics. And it's a challenge that we've had to face amongst ourselves, but also recognise that there is that challenge in wider society, a challenge within the groups that we represent. And so whilst we have faced and to a certain extent overcome those challenges amongst us, we're still battling with those challenges in wider society, which influence abuse and causes abuse, but it's not just exclusively within abuse, it's with society as a whole. And I think that's a major challenge and a battle which we are seeking to fight together.
Okay, so changing gears a little bit, either Tony or Peter can answer this for me.
Thank you very much.
What do you think Christianity offers to child abuse? How do you think, what's the voice which Christianity offers here?
Thank you, Peter. I think that from a faith perspective, so I don't think it's just an exclusively Christian one, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the heart of Christianity is about there's only one race, we're all equal before the eyes of God, and everyone has an equal value, and everybody needs to be respected, and abuse is a disrespect. And that there is also, in the heart of Christianity, is an answer to the power imbalance, which is those who have power seek to humble themselves and use that power for the benefit of others, which is what Christ did. And Christ, being, I would say, as being God, demonstrated who God is by making himself, humbling himself to make him as a servant, and actually giving his life up for others. And so therefore I bring the sense that I need to speak up for those who are disadvantaged, those who are powerless, which includes those who are abused.
Yeah. We need to call evil evil, sin sin, and recognise that, not fudge it, not play games with that, and recognise it whether it's in our midst or whether it's out there. And I think it's that calling out, being prepared to talk about something in those terms without pointing the finger, without playing games, that really has defined some of what we are. And because actually what we bring to this is openness, honesty, integrity, as well as that respect for all.
Okay, Rehana, so what would you say Islam offers in this respect?
I think really central, I think Islam offers so much to this, but perhaps I'll reframe the question and slightly talk a little bit about my motivations and what my faith brings to me, and what I hope to bring to this conversation is compassion, which I think is a really central part of our faith. And that means, that in a similar way to, I guess, how Tony has articulated it, is that we have to humble ourselves a little, that we have to put ourselves in other people's shoes, particularly when we're talking about children here. So much of the narrative around the abuse has focused on the victims, what they could do, what they should do differently in order to prevent that abuse from happening. We are really committed to turning that onto our head. What do the rest of us have to do? So that's compassion, and connected to that is justice. And what does justice mean? What does justice look like? And I've said this many, many times, and people will have heard it from me, but justice means that we prioritise those with the least power. And that we not just humble ourselves and consider that, but we humble ourselves and hand some of that power over. So I think those two are some of the kind of core values that I think that we bring here and that we're motivated by.
And I think it comes to the basic issue of what we're talking about is faith therefore has something to say to a secular society whose premise is a free market, it's the strength to the powerful,
yes,
and that it needs a faith perspective to bring in. And
so this is going on to the next question.
Can I just say before we go there,
Yes.
I mean, just to say in terms of Rahana's response, compassion, justice, if those mark out two aspects of a Muslim response, those are not just words. But I see the passion for justice in this woman. But I also see, and it's something I've known from the first day I met her, is the compassion. And so actually, I think we seek to live out the best of what we are. And I see the best of Islam in my friend here and her colleagues. And that, I think, is something that marks out really what we are as faces. I mean, Rahana said we seek to be the very best of what interfaith can be, and I think that sort of deep mutual respect is something that has grown amongst us.
Well, I think it sounds like you've got a really very deep friendship, and there's a lot of common themes that are between the religions as well on this one focus. Maybe kind of going on a tangent here, but do you think justice and compassion, if we're looking at the perpetrator, for example, where does compassion fit into this?
it fits in. There's a sense in all of us, we're all both victims and perpetrators. So I think that you can't have a simple divide and say this person is a victim, this person is a perpetrator. And the reality is we're all a mixture of both. And all of us need to recognise and acknowledge that. And therefore all of us need both justice and compassion.
Yeah. And we both all believe in change. People's lives can change, and so a perpetrator can change. Now, they're always going to have to be very mindful and guarding. Those lessons we learn as church leaders and so on, that actually you have to be very attentive to this. But actually, that person can change. And we want to create an environment where hopefully that will change. It's not the centre of our work, but it certainly is our belief.
So in practice, and this is where at times faith communities have got it wrong, where they haven't got the two together. And so if you've got someone who has abused children, and as it happens within faith communities, for example, there needs to be compassion for them and help them to know that there's forgiveness that's available for them, but also justice comes in. And so it's not just about them being forgiven, which is appropriate, and it's ultimately it's God that needs to forgive, and they need to come to God for forgiveness. There's also justice that's needing to be done, such that they need to go through the appropriate channels in terms of justice in the system, which is potentially going through the courts and elsewhere, and so the two go together.
And also, I think the world is quite complicated, and we often talk in binaries, but that's not reflective of the world we live in. So victim-perpetrator binaries are probably not that helpful. But I think ultimately what we want is for these violations not to happen at all. And we need to be able to imagine a world where that doesn't happen. And if we wanted to create that world, then what do we do? And that does require compassion, empathy, work, support with everybody. It's kind of almost going backwards to come forwards.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question here. So this is what the theme of this discussion is about. So what are the implications of interfaith work in a secular context, particularly when secularism seems to be presented as a default of British society?
Well, I'll just open up to say that there are often framings of secularism as being default, as being neutral, but it's neither of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So secularism has its own articulations, it has its own ideas, and it has its own actions and consequences in the ways that it functions. And we see that in Britain, we see it in France very acutely. And so I'm just going to open by saying that that's just a false characterisation of what secularism is, and what it does for society. That'll be my opening, and I'll let my friends respond to it.
I think secularism arose because, certainly in the West, you look at France, you look at the similar direction but very different outworking of it in Britain. Secularism arose because of the power and the abuse of power by religious institutions, and in our British situation, the Church of England, for example, as it was so wedded to the establishment, or is still so wedded to the establishment.
So, Peter, my question would be, what, from this perspective as a modern interfaith organisation, how are we placing ourselves in that position of power? Of course, we recognise that. And what do we offer in response to secular society?
Whilst he's thinking, that whilst we claim to be a secular society, we are a large percentage of it is also faith-based.
Yeah.
And so a secular society can't enforce secularism on everybody. It's the mistake that Peter's talking about has happened in the past in terms of the church seeking to impose itself on everybody. And in a sense there is that dynamic in fallen human nature that wants to do that. And at the moment it's secularism that's seeking to impose itself on others.
Could you give us an example here?
Oh, absolutely. the way that it caricatures faith. And so we've talked about Islam, and we've talked about the compassion of Islam, and yet secular society would seek to paint Islam as the enemy, and without any sense of trying to understand things, and seeking to impose laws on things and thinking that it speaks for everyone without listening.
So I think, secularism and, the articulations associated with it, if we're really honest, serve to discipline us. And discipline us in a way that says that there is this one particular way of being, and you must be that way. I think that's where, particularly our work challenging prejudices and challenging the unequal way that people are treated, which is motivated by our faith and our faith values, is really important here, because going back to my original point, secularism is not neutral. Secularism will tell me that I don't have a place here, and what we are saying is actually, yes, we do. We all have a place here.
And together we can speak and make secular authorities listen in the way that we can't individually. And part of our role, I think, is to help secularists, secular societies, secular powers to understand faith and to speak on behalf of faith, not just on behalf as a Christian or a Muslim, but together and challenge. There are other ways of thinking about things. and that you need to take that in account to bring about a healthy society.
Yeah.
So we're kind of coming to the end of this discussion here, but I do want to have one final question. It's kind of linked with the previous one. What do you see for the future of interfaith organisations? I'll let you start off, Peter.
I mean, I think to just tie it in with where we were, for myself, as somebody who has a leadership role in the Church of England, which is still so very linked to the secular state, we have a position of power. I recognise that. I cannot fail to, I must not fail to own that. I want freedom for all my friends. I want faith to be taken seriously. And my role, particularly within that context of being a member of the Church of England, is to create space for all. Now, what the future holds in terms of the continuing place of the Church of England, I don't know. But my place at the moment is to recognise I have power, but to create equal stage for all of us. And recognise, yes, I have a role in inviting friends to join me in that space. That then has to, my power in invitation then has to be laid down so that we are equals on that stage. But I do know that faith is important. I don't want to see faith ruled out as some versions of secularisation have continued. So actually, I think Faces gives us the opportunity to explore what faith brings to society and to create a platform for that. But to do so in the modern world where people from an Islamic community, people from a Christian community are able to walk forward together in working for the best in our society.
Rehana, what do you make of that?
I think if interfaith faith organisations are going to be able to speak meaningfully to the challenges that we have in society, in the country, then I think there needs to be a real shift in the way that we work. I said right at the beginning that I think faces are unique, and I really mean that. I think there has been and there continues to be interfaith models that don't equally distribute the power, that rely on a sense of benevolence of one group over the other, that we can often, I know that I've been there, that I walk into a room and there are all of these assumptions loaded onto me, and I feel I have to respond to those assumptions when we have that, and we've erased that, we try and erase that, we're working on that in here, but that isn't the case across interfaith groups. There are long histories between our faiths. Some of those are ugly histories of colonialism and imperialism, which do impact the way that we work and see each other now. And we've really got to do this piece of work of dismantling that, and then come together to work on what is actually a challenge for all of us.
And I think that we need to do that in order to challenge the society as a whole, because there are victims of our society, and so the poor get poorer, and just the general side effects of capitalism and the way things are creates victims. And I think that modern interfaith organisations need to be able to speak together, deal with grappling with about our issues and understanding each other, but then seek to do for the good of the whole, and speak to powers and to say, no, there's a different way of doing things, and for us to be clear on the basis that we're doing that, which is our faith and our understanding of how things are.
Thank you for that. I'd like to thank you all for taking part in this discussion. I know you're all very busy people. So, as you can see, Faces has an active dialogue, one which we're interpreting, reinterpreting, challenging in many ways. But at the core of it is protecting children. We can all agree on that, but also we have other values which flow from that: justice, compassion, mercy, patience. I'd like to thank you all for watching.
you.